Let's start with the question. What is the one word that crystallized the last 10 months for you? For me, it was curiosity, and I'll explain that as we go along. I'd like you to keep a word in your mind also for now. What is certain is that these last few months have given us tales to tell all through our lives. There has never been a shared collective experience akin to what we went through and what we are still going through. We all shared the same reality. We went through times which we would look back and remember with a shudder, or maybe not. We all saw it from an intensely personal, subjective experience. Whether we liked it or not, we all were invited to pause our lives. Why did I want to call this a pause and not a pandemic? For the first time, everything in humanity, the definitions of what defined us, came to a halt. Out of that moment crystallized in time, came out a bunch of interesting, intensely personal experiences and questions. Not only was I dealing with and experiencing the same pause as the others, while it was all unfolding, I was getting a ringside view of how it was all unpacking for so many of us as mental health professionals and for our clients. Let me tell you about 3 patients I met during the last few months amongst many, and what it meant to me as a therapist and for them as clients. There was Jaya. Jaya was a working professional. She was married, 35 years old, with a 6-year-old daughter. She was carving a world for herself, living by her own rules. Home was home, work was work, and the division was clear. She had a life as a professional and another one as a spouse and mother, all separate and all compartmentalized. She made breakfast and then a PowerPoint and never did the twain meet. But that changed for her in March. Everything paused. The lines were blurred. There was a problem that soon became evident. Those at work didn't understand or appreciate that her lives were getting mixed up. Neither did her own family. The fulcrum of the family, Jaya, was slowly disintegrating with juggling all her responsibilities. She was soon to be amongst those who realized that she needed to reach out, and I'm so glad that she did. One of the biggest breakthrough moments in therapy is the realization of the importance of wanting to help yourself. For many, the pandemic, the pause, was that moment. Finally, the importance of mental health was in the forefront. The virus, which was contracted physically, but there it was mentally where it was processed. How we navigated the coming times was based on how we thought, felt, and acted. For Jaya, the process of therapy was supportive. Sarita, on the other hand, was already in therapy. She was 65. She came into therapy quite reluctantly, to say the least. It actually was her daughter who convinced her to give it a shot, or rather sometimes arm-twisted her. She was not someone who believed she needed therapy. For her, it was something that others did. It was certainly not for her. She was stoic, practical, and felt that she could solve her own problems. When I met her, it was very difficult for me as a therapist to get through to her. She was defensive to my suggestions. As I said, she was only there to please the daughter. Her daughter had presented a case to me saying that she felt that her mother was suffering from mild depression. But as a therapist, I struggled to get through to her before the pandemic. It was clear that she was refusing to accept that she needed help. She was hiding in the routine that was her daily life. That was the way to keep the depression away. Keep herself busy living every day. Day-to-day stuff was her coping mechanism, till the pause snatched it away. And everything changed for her once the pandemic hit. When she reached out to me as a therapist during the pandemic, I could see the change. All her defenses melted away. She went through a mini, I would say breakthrough, or some people would say a mini breakdown of some sorts. It was strange to experience this as a therapist. On the one hand, you're exhilarated at the breakthrough. On the other hand, it was heartbreaking to see someone who presented herself with such strength suddenly be aware of her vulnerabilities and frailties. For her, the pause brought her closer to herself. She discovered herself underneath the veneer of self-image that she had built over 6 odd decades. She was finally confronting all her demons, and it was lovely to see her blossom into a more accepting person who was no longer afraid of her own frailties. For Sarita, the process of therapy was transformative. Let's move on to Anisha. She's a single 28-year-old who was living with her parents. She worked as a chef and had been suffering from anxiety for a while. Sometimes her anxiety was so debilitating that it did not allow her to function normally. Morbid thoughts came to her often, and she lived under the fear of contracting illnesses, amongst the other fears that she had. She had what we call health anxiety. She came to me about 6 months prior to the pandemic, and we used to work on trying to help her cope and process these thoughts. No matter what I said and suggested, her first instinct was always to ask, but what if something goes wrong? It was difficult for her to live with uncertainty and accept it. I was very worried when the pandemic hit that she would splinter and her condition would worsen. But what was absolutely fascinating was that nothing changed. Actually having an illness that was spreading everywhere, right at your doorstep, changed very little for her. It didn't influence how she felt. I was extremely curious about this. I was fascinated that a condition which I thought would worsen had not. Not that I wanted it to worsen, but what stood out for me was the curious way that the mind works. In spite of clear and present danger, the mind was still fixated on imagined fears. Anxiety is sometimes irrelevant to the circumstances. Strange, isn't it? Just makes you show the amount we still need to learn about how the mind works and how our brains are mapped. For Anisha, the process of therapy was acceptance of uncertainty. And that's why the word curiosity came to my mind. What made one person survive and another thrive in these strange times? What constitutes good mental health? According to who? Mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Wow, that's such a tall order. It's also important to remember that mental health is complex, and to divide it in a box gets very difficult, but let's try and simplify this. What constitutes good mental health? A good belief system. It's important to hold a positive belief system. It's important to affirm yourself more than tear yourself down, which will produce more resilience and optimism. Secondly, support. If you feel well supported by yourself or in a community, family or work, or any cause, there's a feeling of having a sense of purpose. Thirdly, flexibility. If you can manage to regulate your emotional health and live with some mastery over it, you can learn to be flexible and adaptable. Healthy relationships. Having someone or something that you care about and who cares for you makes you feel secure and safe. So just to reiterate, a positive belief system, social support, emotional flexibility, healthy relationships are some of the ways to stay mentally healthy. Is all of the above absolutistic? Not at all. None of us have it all, but we can strive to have some of it. Saying that, if you experience any difficulty, please know that help is always around in some form or the other. For example, a therapist is never far away. At the end of this talk, I do want you to remember what I asked you initially. What was the one word that crystallized these last 10 months for you? Mine was curiosity. I want you to think, what was yours?